hour. But I wanted to give you guys a chance to respond if anybody had any questions on this, go into some of the questions and answers. Larissa, do we have anything we need to respond to?
We have a few questions here. Janet wants to know if she found out from a park ranger that a baby loon had died in September. Are we wanting to know this information?
You can always tell us if I like to review those, but as part of the data, we can't do much with it. We just record it and post it to the system. It's not a bad thing to look into your local community or contact the Canadian Cooperative Wildlife Health Centre and see if they can do an autopsy on that bird. But really, at that stage, there's not much we can do with the data. We know that the majority, if the majority of loons that live to 6 weeks of age on an inland lake are likely to fledge off the lake. And right across North America, this reproductive success calculation is based on that. Any other questions?
Yeah, a similar one Mark asked was that if they know their loons have failed by mid-July, can they complete their data?
Oh, absolutely. It is so important to have those negatives. So you fill out the form. If you don't see any chicks, you put down 0 all the way through. Sadly, too many people don't tell us the negatives. And to get a true picture of how reproduction is going in Canada, we need all the ones that hatch, we need all the ones that grow up, and we need all the ones that no longer exist. So if there's a failure, definitely tell us those zeros. Those are very important.
And another question is, how long is like a survey? If they scan the lake for 5 minutes, does that count as a survey, or do they need to spend a certain amount of time?
It all depends on the lake. You need to remember that this is designed predominantly to be done with your other activity. So it all depends on the lake, the size of the lake, the size of your area you're surveying. If you are confident that you have seen all the loons that you have seen in your survey area, you're done. I qualify that with saying if you're not seeing loons, take the extra time to look a little closer, because that makes a big difference there. So those non-answers should take longer than the answers about I have 2 chicks. If you've already seen your territorial pair, you already know how many chicks they have, you already know your answers, you don't have to go farther.
Yeah, we have a bunch of questions coming in now.
Okay, well, I'm going to put the poll up and then we'll answer the questions while people respond to the poll. And it's just what I'm curious about. I'm just figuring out how to launch it here. And we'll give them, they should be able to answer this in a minute. All right, so what's the next question?
Is the maximum number of loons the most seen in one day, or the total number of loons seen over the month?
Not total, it's a snapshot. So it's the biggest number you see at any point during the month. So if you see 5 on the 5th and 15 on the 20th, it's a 15.
Another one is, if nest locations are known, should I provide GPS coordinates?
We actually have that in the Q&A, but we can touch it here. We don't track them. If you want to get into that much detail, a great place to put the data is Project Nest Watch, which tracks into the Canadian Nest Record Scheme. But for us, it's not information we can use. We really don't need people searching for the nests. So don't worry about sending it to us. We have really no place to store it.
And someone asked also, should they report any renesting?
Yes, that's another question that we have, and we can go over it a bit more later. But basically, the way you would report it is you'd just report 0, and then when you see chicks, you report 1 or 2 or how many chicks you see at that month. And then just add a comment on the section 5 with the breeding success information. It says, this is a renest, they lost their first nest for whatever reason. And be careful with for whatever reason you give. If you don't know the reason, don't put it down. There's a lot of supposition given about why the nest is lost without actual knowledge. If you do know and have proof of that, feel free to record it.
Okay, someone's asking about eagles. Do eagles take baby loons or even adults?
Ooh, well, that's a toughie. Yes, of course they do, because they're predators. It's a really complex interaction system. Do eagles take chicks? Yes. Do eagles take adults? Yes. Can loons defend themselves from adult eagles? Absolutely. There was a necropsy done in the eastern states this year of a loon, of an eagle that was stabbed to death by a loon. So it's not necessarily the eagle always wins these situations. Is this the biggest problem with loons? Probably unlikely. We know that the big problem seems to be trauma, lead, and trauma and lead are the two big ones for now. I'm thinking, give me a few minutes and I'll come up with the third one. Yeah. So we got great answers on the poll. Do we have any questions? Any more questions before I move on, Larissa?
Yeah, we have 3 more. Someone is interested to know, how do I find out if any other volunteers are surveying the same lake?
I can't tell you. And the reason I can't tell you is because of their privacy rights and your privacy rights. I would suggest you make a note, contact your lake association. Many lakes have their own Facebook page, and just put the word out there. I'm surveying. If you have data, send it to me. If you're also surveying, let's get together and work together and use those local options. I can tell you that more often than not, there are never 2 people surveying the same section. It is incredibly rare.
Okay, someone is interested to know, how do they determine what is a large young bird or 3 adults?
Oh, that's getting technical here. Large young versus juvenile versus adult. A large young is 6 weeks old. It's just starting to look like an adult loon. It's not quite. If you look at the, let me see if I can pull it up here. If you look at the, I make no guarantees I'll succeed at this, at the, what do I have that would show this? Just a second here. I'm pulling up a little image here. I don't know what you guys can see right now. Hopefully not this mess that I have open. All right. The adults have a different pattern than a large young, and they have a different pattern of a juvenile. Something to keep in mind, though, that you're going to rarely see second-year birds the same time as you see adult birds, because those immature stages are on the oceans. They don't stay on the they may stay on the Great Lakes, but they don't stay on the inland waters. The other thing to keep in mind that first year young, when they get quite large, they have more of a scallopy pattern to their feathers, while the adult loons are more of a the checkerboard square pattern that they have. Even when they go gray, they still have a light tone of that checkerboard. And there is a great document out there, and I have it in my information here. That actually might be the best way of pulling it up here. Enter ID of loons. All right, I'm going to share this. I'm going to end the poll as well, and we'll look at that in a minute. I'll share this here. This is an oldie but a goodie. This is Ron Pittaway's and Michael King's and Jean Irons Loon ID for fall and winter. And here's a great example. You see the squares at the back of the specific loon here? If you can all see it, I'm hoping you can. Let me double check here. That is an example of an adult. So when we look at this here, The common loon is very squarish on the back. The first year young is very scallopy. And that's what the fall colors look like. When they're younger and they're at 6 weeks, they don't quite look that grown up yet. They're a little bit more fluffy. They look like a messy teenager when they're younger than that stage. Any other questions before we do the poll?
Yes, just one more. How do I report a failed nest on an artificial platform, but then the same loon pair having a successful natural nest later?
Just as you would normally, you would put down the zeros. Be certain you have the same pair. We have not discussed it, and something I bring up later is we got loon invasions that we have to deal with. Be certain that it's the same pair. And if that's the case, you would report it as zeros, and then when they hatch later, you report 1, and then you add in the comments, this is a re-nest on a new nesting site, originally used a platform and then changed. But the question that answer was asked in the Q&A, and what caught my attention with it was, how do we know that was the same territorial pair? And you would base that on whether they're in the same basic vicinity, something like that, and consider things like, has there been major loon disputes at that site? Is it a long distance from the original nest? All those things may come into play, and you may eventually decide that, maybe it's not the original pair. But if you are confident it is the original pair, that's how you report it. Again, zeros until you have chicks, and then put your notes in the comment forms. Anything else, Larissa?
Nope, we got through it.
All right, now I'm hoping you guys can see my share of the results. And I asked people to come up with a basic idea of what they think is impacting loons. And it's all over the place. But there's certain things that come out very clear that people see are a problem. Climate change, trauma of some sort, predation, habitat loss impacting nest sites. That's the biggest one, and that's a fair concern. And habitat loss impacting food supply, and human disturbance during nesting. I think you guys have hit the big ones. And it's good to see that and to see what people are concerned about on the lakes. So I'm going to stop the share results, and I'm going to continue. It's after 8:30. If people want me to continue with the Q&A, I'm happy to until 9 o'clock. If they would prefer to see us log off now, feel free to speak up, or you can come back and watch the webinar later. Any thoughts on that? Perhaps I will continue, and if people want to say goodbye, they can just head out. Does that sound fair to everybody? Okay, so some of these have already been answered. So locating nests is not a big deal for us. They are not necessarily defined. That territories are very clear for the species, so we ask you to watch territories, and we don't really track the nests, so you don't really need to do GPS coordinates, and don't worry if you can't find the nest. The biggest thing is to understand to understand whether they're on territory or not. So how do you decide if they're on territory or not? That was another big question that I took from all the questions that were asked. Remember that loons are very loyal to the nest and the territory. They'll come back to the same area year and year. They'll try one nest in that area. If that doesn't work, they'll try another nest, then another nest, until they find one that suits their need through time. So they're very big on staying in that specific area. So if you watch your lake, you can quickly map and see where all the loons are in the lake, and you can get a really good idea how many pairs and territories you need to track. And remember that one loon often can represent a nest, especially in June. Remember, they're often separated by visual or physical barriers like bays and islands. And they need quiet nesting locations. You're not going to find them in those center areas with a lot of water. And when those territories fail, they will move out and about. So territories can fail for many reasons. We know black flies have been shown and reported as an issue in the US. We don't know how big of an issue it is here. We know that flooding of nests is a common occurrence in Canada. We know that predation, there's abandonment, and there's invasions by other loons that destroy the territorial pair in June and July. So that relates to a lot of the stuff we discussed earlier. Do we have any questions that kind of relate to that, Larissa, that I should answer right now before I move forward?
No.
Okay. So another question that was asked was, well, I do my survey in Georgian Bay area. Do others report in this area? And this is a very interesting question in the fact that we don't see a lot of loon breeding on Great Lakes. So you would think when you look at all these sections on Georgian Bay that we should, but we don't. And we don't see a lot of surveyors there for the same reason. They usually figure out after a year or two, this is just not great survey areas. So in 2019, we had one survey on Georgian Bay. In 2018, we have two. Now, why is this not a good survey area? It's because it's such open water. You get a lot of lake effect. Remember, loons can only handle 6-inch increase in water and a 12-inch decrease. So it just is not a great location for loons. And as I mentioned before, we usually call the lake survey size here 1% because really nothing else compare. Another question was, can I take observations from nearby cottagers? Yes, you can. You just need to be responsible to ensure that they know what they're doing and then they're not reporting 6 merganser chicks instead of loons and things like that. And you can amalgamate all that data and send it in a one data set as long as you're confident the data is accurate. I wanted to show you this image to show you how different lakes look. We've already discussed that Georgian Bay is bad for loons, but this is Lake of the Woods over here. So it's another big lake, arguably probably similar in size to Georgian Bay, give or take a couple hundred square miles. And there's a lot of sections on it as well, but these are active sections that you can get loons on, and that's because of all the convolutions on this lake. It really shows that you can get a lot of territories on it. Well, this bottom lake here before is very round. You'd be lucky to get one territory on it. Now for sections, Lake of the Woods again, each survey section would be a 1% survey area, and you'd want to identify that area fairly carefully to make sure that I can find it again. Well, on this very round lake, you could easily do 100% of the lake, or you could split it in two and say do 50% of it. But I suspect if you stand on one side of the shore, you can see the whole lake. So now we're going to discuss dividing up large lakes, but I'd rather approach questions that volunteers on the talk have. Is there anything else, Larissa, or should I just keep going?
You have one more question. If I observe tampering with water levels, e.g. digging trench to drain a marsh, do you know whom I report it?
Off the top of my head, no. It all depends on where you are. For example, if you're in Ontario in a conservation authority watershed, you'd probably report it to them. It would be a case of finding out who has water jurisdiction in your area, and that will change province to province, and talking to them about it. Very regional dependent for something like that. Okay. So the next question that I thought I'd approach, or do we have many people left online? Maybe it's time to stop, Larissa. What do you think?
We have about 14 attendees and still 3 panelists.
Okay, how many pages do I have left here? Oh, we're almost done, so I'll go through these. It'll be pretty quick. I just use this image here to show how we split up a lake. And basically what we do is we look for logical boundaries on sections, and you split it up that way. The other thing you could do is you could map where people are seeing the loons and figure out your sections on that. Just remember to think in the long term, which sections make sense for surveying this lake over the long term. And maybe in the first couple of years, when you get data, you sit there and say, oh, this doesn't quite work. and you need to adapt your sections. But normally, it's fairly easy to split them up based on ease of survey for each different separate region. Does it matter if I do not provide the bird list checklist? No, it's optional. Loons seen that may not be breeding and why? That question was asked in the registration forms. That one's a tough one to approach. There is so many reasons why loons may not be breeding. Is this ever on your lake or just the lake? I would myself customize the answer to a long conversation with the person who's asking the question. So if that's your question, go ahead and call me. It may relate to anything from the conditions on your lake to perhaps a flooding or black fly event this year, or a change in pair. If it's a new pair or an old pair, they don't breed as well. Or just one of those years where they didn't have a good year to get started with. So there's many reasons behind that, and I would need to have a conversation with people to decide if it's an ongoing problem, a problem this year, and what events may have occurred around the breeding time that could have caused it. Well, this is a question we've already answered about 2 loon eggs on a man-made platform. And what I recommended was you put zeros for the months that you had no young. At the number for the young when you add, remember that your 6-week chicks are likely to be late, and add a comment to that effect in your comments, and also make a point of saying that it's a re-nest. At the same time, they asked, how long does it take to replace a clutch of eggs for loons? And it's quite frankly seasonally dependent. So at the start of the breeding season, if they lose a nest, it takes about 8 days to lay eggs again. Later on, it takes about 19 days, and they will rarely lay into August. Usually they have at most 2 clutches a year and 1 set of chicks. I'm having problems signing in with my phone. Thanks, Larissa, everyone. She developed a fact sheet on how to do that. Would you be able to provide graphics and tips about identifying loons in Ontario? Well, there's only one loon to identify in Ontario. The document I showed earlier by Dean Arn and Ron Pittaway and their crew is a great one to use. Hinterland's Who's Who has great information, and so does Cornell, all about birds. I don't see us developing this, but I will put it out there to communications. They know everybody loves loon stuff, so they may want to have such a blog at some point. Will my lake location data be filled in from other years? It is. It should be. If it's not, we're catching up. I truly believe no data was lost when transferring from the new system, and my early checks show that. We just lost some of the bridges that listed your name back to that data. I will just hold off on that question. It's a big one, and there's a blog on the website about nest platforms. And if this is your question about how far apart I should place my platforms, give me a call and we can discuss it one-on-one. And we'll consider that it. Before we sign off, Larissa, is there any more questions?